people have this like conception that Najee Harris, I see all the memes out there that he looks like he's running in wet jeans. People say whatever they want about Najee Harris, but he still does have some juice this year, and the numbers back it up. And if you watch it with your eyes, like, he still has some good plays out there. I really don't understand this hatred that the fantasy community seems to have for Najee Harris.
Well, I mean, I think go ahead, Alfredo.
I'm so sorry. What? Wet jeans? I have never heard that expression
Najee
in
Harris
my
looks
life.
like he runs in wet
That's
jeans.
That's because you played football in Miami. He played football in the snow in Chicago or in Denver.
The thing is that now I can't get this image out of my head of like a guy just
pretty much.
Yeah. Fantasy playoffs are almost here. We're trying to figure out who we're going to start. If you're like me, in half of your leagues, you need a win right now, or else you're not making the playoffs. I'm Alfredo Brown, joined by Dave Kluge, as always, and we've got special guest Matt Waldman here today. We're going to take a look at our Week 10 starts and sleepers. And if you're listening over on the Audible podcast, go and check us out. We are the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. We're just brand new this year. We're on episode 61 now, Dave. Look at that. We haven't been canceled or fired or anything yet, or replaced. It's going well so far.
If that's the bar for success, we haven't been canceled or fired. Yes, we are doing very, very well.
I mean, we're the Mac Jones of fantasy football podcasts. We just simply haven't been benched. We just haven't been doing a great job. Let's jump into the running back starts of the week here. And Matt, you are the guest here today, so I'm going to let you start us off here. Who is your first running back start of the week in Week 10?
Well, this is a fun one because I just look at all the hate for Arthur Smith over the past, month and a half.
There's
because they haven't been feeding Bijan Robinson. They haven't been feeding Kyle Pitts. They can't get Drake London the ball, all of those things. And it's culminated to the point where a couple weeks ago, Arthur Smith, who I actually think is a pretty good offensive coach from what I've seen, he did pretty well with Desmond Ridder in terms of trying to make things work with what he was saddled with. And then eventually being able to have enough compelling evidence to say, let's move forward with Taylor Heineke. Now, that's what I'm thinking behind the scenes based on what I've seen in scheme. When you look at Robinson, when they asked him about, this lack of work early on, he got kind of defensive and combative about fantasy football. And I get it because he doesn't have time for folks like us. He doesn't care about us. This is kind of mindless, piddling stuff that he doesn't have to shouldn't be concerned with, but people are putting it in front of him all the time. So I think at some point, somebody from the Falcons front office said, look, you're going to have to give a more nuanced explanation because as silly as this may seem to you, PR is going to be important in your public opinion. If it goes down the crapper, you may not have a job, even though we like what you're doing. So if you can actually show everyone actually how smart you are, rather than just talk to everybody as if like they're dumb, that subtlety might actually be a little bit different. So to me, the fact that now that people are making him give an intelligent explanation as to what he's doing, has probably rang into his stubborn mind that, you know what, we may need to feed Bijan the ball a little bit in the red zone just to get these people to shut up a little bit. So looking at the matchup against Arizona, they're pretty awful against running backs, and they're really awful against running backs who catch passes. So Robinson to me looks like a good opportunity for him instead of being a running back too. Maybe he gets to be what people valued him at pre-draft.
Yeah, and I was looking at it yesterday, and I was like, I don't know that I can rank Bijan Robinson as a top 12 running back this week, but he's just so good, and the Cardinals defense is so bad that I don't think I can put him outside the top 16. And you start to look, and then there's teams on bye, and I'm like, all right, running back 14. That's just where I'm going to put him this week. So yeah, I think as volatile as he's been, he's kind of a must start this week. Dave, you've got another guy, not nearly as, highly lauded as Bijan Robinson, but he's been a pretty good fantasy ass this year. So give us your running back start of the week here in Week 10.
Yeah, we've got two, and I'm going to start with Jaylen Warren going up against Green Bay. Green Bay has been pretty beatable by running backs this year. They're giving up the 10th most points to opposing running backs on the year. But really what it is that teams are just running the ball a lot against Green Bay. I looked at it yesterday. 31.3 rushing attempts per game against the Packers defense is the third most in the league. And, you start looking at it, and I think we've kind of got two viable running backs here in Pittsburgh, and I think that Warren might have the slightly higher ceiling of the two. Warren is outscoring Najee Harris on the year, which is kind of crazy. And especially if you look at rankings still have Najee Harris pretty high ahead of Jaylen Warren. And no matter where you put a split in this season, it seems like Warren is kind of the guy who is scoring more fantasy points. Now, it has been almost exactly kind of a 55-45 split all year. But what I like about Jaylen Warren is that he is out targeting Najee Harris 35-21. So he's getting a little bit more work in the passing game, which obviously raises his ceiling a little bit. So, like I said, I think you can start both of these guys this week, Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. I just think that the consensus is still a little bit too low on Jaylen Warren, who has shown some really fun explosiveness this year. So starting him ahead of Devin Singletary, who is, the presumed starter now in Houston going up against Cincinnati. I'm starting him ahead of Zach Moss, who is slowly kind of getting phased out and has a somewhat difficult matchup against New England. So Jaylen Warren fits in as a top 30 running back for me this week. He's a guy that you haven't really felt too great about. He hasn't had a lot of boom games so far, but I think this matchup against Green Bay is a possibility for him to put up some pretty meaningful points.
So you bring up Jaylen Warren here, the Pittsburgh rushing attack, and I'm just going to piggyback off of that, man. I'm going with Najee Harris going up against the Green Bay Packers as well. And I feel like you stole my notes here because that was one of the things I was going to talk about is the fact that opponents are running the ball a ton against the Packers. And that's why I think I think we can both be right here. Both things can be true. Both running backs can do well. They're at the Pittsburgh Steelers defense going up against Jordan Love this week. I don't know if the Packers are going to be able to get much going outside of maybe just getting that ball to Aaron Jones as much as they can. And the Steelers, they don't really have much going on with Kenny Pickett right now. Outside of him and that connection to Deontay Johnson, it's going to be a lot of running that ball. Najee Harris has had 15 PPR points in 2 of his last 3 games, and we're seeing that he's actually been getting used in the end zone quite a bit. He looks better than he did in the beginning of the year, and I know you mentioned the targets for Jaylen Warren. Taking a look at it right now, Najee Harris, 5 targets in week 8, 4 targets in week 9. Those numbers are starting to go up for him as well. So just the overall usage for these running backs continues to go up. And I think this is probably going to be one of those ugly, smash mouth football type of games. Not a lot of points, not a lot of passing, not a lot of the fun stuff that we like to see for fantasy football. But it does mean that the running backs are going to be pretty viable here this week.
All right, Matt, as the guest, now you need to be the voice of reason here because these guys, I mean, if you look in rankings, like they are back to back in a lot of people's set of rankings. Some people prefer Warren, some people prefer Najee. In this matchup against Green Bay, I think you could make a strong argument for either running back. Do you have a preference between Jaylen Warren or Najee Harris this week? Let's say somebody is rostering both. They wanted to handcuff Najee Harris early in the season. Would you say to play Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren? Do you have a stance between the two this week in this matchup?
I do, and I think that both are obviously viable plays. And over the past 3 weeks, listen, Jaylen Warren's the number 21 running back in PPR formats. Najee Harris is 13th, averaging 4 more points per game. And it's kind of at the point that when Mike Tomlin and company said to Harris, it was around that time they said to Harris, "We're going to do a split. We're going to actually just split time." And Harris started playing with a little bit more urgency. You could notice that in his game. And while he and Warren get along well, yeah, you're seeing him pretty fired up. It was against the Chargers. Now you can get any running back could get easily fired up against the Los Angeles Chargers defense. But still, he does look good, and he's playing with a little bit more ferocity in terms of finishing runs. So, yeah, I would go for Harris probably at this point, only because I think that Pittsburgh's offense can get enough going that they will be having closeout touches, and those closeout touches probably go to Harris.
Let me read a few stats to you because when you hear people talk about Najee Harris, They talk about him like he's like a 36-year-old Frank Gore in Arizona, like he's got no juice in the tank or anything like that. You start looking at some of the efficiency metrics. He is 10th in the league in jukes, 10th in the league in evaded tackles. He's 9th in the league in breakaway run rate. So people have this like conception that Najee Harris, I see all the memes out there that he looks like he's running in wet jeans. People say whatever they want about Najee Harris, but he still does have some juice this year, and the numbers back it up. And if you watch it with your eyes, like he still has some good plays out there. I really don't understand this hatred that the fantasy community seems to have for Najee Harris.
Well, I mean, I think go ahead, Alfredo.
I'm so sorry.
Answer.
What? Wet jeans? I have never heard that expression
Najee
in
Harris
my
looks
life.
like he runs in wet
That's
jeans.
because you played football in Miami. He played football in the snow in Chicago or in Denver.
The thing is that now I can't get this image out of my head of like a guy just
pretty much. Yeah. But no, I mean, listen, Najee Harris has been kind of what Adam Harstead at Football Guys and I call a dented can. In Dynasty, he's a guy that you pick up and you buy into the sell low type of thing, opportunities that often occur with him. And it's the same thing like with Le'Veon Bell. I mean, way back in the day, I remember looking at Le'Veon Bell, and the Steelers were revamping their offensive line, and everybody thought Bell was awful because they paid too much attention to yards per carry. And he was averaging 3.8. And I'm going, well, he looks like the same back I saw at Michigan State, who's unbelievably quick, makes people miss. And he just doesn't have a great line right now because they're all banged up. And once that line got together, we saw what Le'Veon Bell could do at his peak. And I think that Najee Harris hasn't hit his peak yet either. So I think there's an opportunity there for him to continue to grow into, a back where they relegate Jaylen Warren probably a little bit more to a third down, 2-minute drill back role later on, maybe next year if they can get that line together. But this year, it's still probably an even split, just favoring Harris a little bit more.
And I think a lot of the disappointment with Najee, too, is because he set the bar so high his rookie season. He gave us a top 5 fantasy finish. He had 94 targets when Ben Roethlisberger couldn't push the ball downfield and was just checking down to Najee. So he's still been a serviceable fantasy quarterback or fantasy running back. He just hasn't hit that ceiling that we saw his rookie season. So you get this kind of distaste in your mouth. I think this was a good discussion. I think we need to tell fantasy managers Najee Harris is still a good running back, and he's going to get volume. And this is a matchup where, if you got Jaylen Warren, you could start him too.
Yep.
Now, if you're enjoying this conversation so far about these running backs, please give this a quick like and be sure you're subscribed to the channel here over at Football Guys. We got a lot of great content coming to you. Football Guys Fantasy Football Show, the Dynasty Show, the Audible, the DFS Show, our Sunday morning live start sit, and so much more over here. And if you have any questions about your Week 10 lineup, drop those questions in the comments below, and we'll be getting back to every single one of those. All right.
But don't look up wet jeans on the internet.
No, definitely do not look up wet jeans on the internet. All right, Matt, give us your next running back start of the week. Hopefully it's someone wearing dry pants this Sunday.
Well, he probably will be wearing dry pants on Sunday because he's playing tonight, and that's Chuba Hubbard. So, looking at the beginning of the season, he looked better than Miles Sanders at the opener, really. And then when Sanders got hurt, they gave them a convenient opportunity to just, let him roll with the role. And I think that he's shown enough, even though the Carolina offensive line isn't good, he still played well enough that he got the start against Indianapolis and he got 20 touches. So when you look at what's going on tonight against the Bears aren't very good at tackling. I just put it that way at this stage. So you look at this game, it's probably going to be fairly close. You're probably going to see another opportunity for Hubbard to get, 17 to 20 touches. And I think that equates well for points if you're looking for a back that you need in these times where there's, a little bit of desperation for players. So I wanted to pick somebody that maybe you could pick up off a waiver wire or you could acquire on the cheap and get reasonable production as a throw-in.
Now I'll kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth here. I talked about how Najee Harris like set the bar so high his rookie season. I think Chuba Hubbard did the complete opposite. And I've talked about that a lot this year. As a rookie, he was terrible. And I think he
Yep.
had a lot of people had high expectations for Chuba Hubbard. And he looked really, really bad his rookie season. And now people have just put this stamp on Chuba Hubbard that he stinks and that he's not a good running back. But he's looked really good this year. And I think people need to kind of change their priors from what we saw his rookie season. He is very clearly looks like the best running back this year in Carolina.
Yeah, and he was a player. I mean, I didn't like him when I scouted him at all. I just thought he was an outside runner who they could run draw plays to and just leverage his speed. Basically, a Keaton Mitchell type that people are really excited about right now. Because it was just about speed. But the Ravens have a good offensive line and a great quarterback who runs, so it opens big lanes. Now looking at Hubbard over the past couple of years, he's increasingly gotten wiser and figured out how to run between the tackles. And you've seen that incrementally get better. And to begin this year, the way he was playing, I wasn't the only one. I had, Brandon Angelo at Angelo FF. He texted me on at the same time going, have you seen Chuba Hubbard? He looks better than Miles Sanders. And I'm thinking, you're not the only one who's thinking that. That's for sure. So I'm glad to see that that's come to fruition for him. And it's nice to see players improve, once they get in the league.
I love it. I love it. Positivity. We're happy that players are getting better. There's too much of that negativity over here on YouTube and in the fantasy football space. And everyone's just mad. I mean, it's week 10. If you're not mad at your fantasy football team, you're not doing it right. All right, Dave, give us your next running back start of the week here. Hopefully someone you're not too mad at.
I think the theme of this show so far has been attacking matchups. We talk about how we like Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris going up against Green Bay. Matt talked earlier about how he likes Bijan Robinson. I'm going to go a little bit deeper, talk about Tyler Allgeier. I think this matchup against Arizona is another one where you can kind of rely on Bijan Robinson and Tyler Allgeier. Arizona's giving up 27 points per game to running backs, third most in the league. And, this is a tough game to get a read on. We got Kyler Murray expected to start, and I'm not expecting to see Kyler Murray at his full strength, 100%. I think that we might see him kind of eased in to his role a little bit. This game kind of worries me a little bit, where I think that Atlanta can kind of control the pace of the game, that they're going to want to run the ball a lot, keep the ball out of Arizona's offensive hands. And really, it just comes down to Arizona being a bad rushing defense. They're giving up the third most rushing yards, fourth most rushing touchdowns, and we have seen that when these games kind of lean into a positive game script, Tyler Allgeier is the guy late in the game. So if they can get a lead, we can see them lean on Tyler Allgeier a little bit. Starting him ahead of some of the same guys I mentioned before, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, but also getting a little bit deeper down the rankings here, starting him ahead of Kareem Hunt, going up against Baltimore in a pretty tough matchup, starting him against Ezekiel Elliott, going up against Indy, as we see Ramondre Stevenson kind of starting to get a bigger role in this New England backfield. So Tyler Allgeier, much like Jaylen Warren, getting a little bit deeper down here, talking about the RB2 on a team, but in a game with a very good matchup, I think Tyler Allgeier can make for a reliable RB2 if you need one.
Yeah, I think that what we're getting to here is there's a lot of backfields that you can just trust this week, even if it's not going to give you the elite results. We need starters, man. We need wins. We need points. I'm going to look.
I won't put you on the spot with a Bijan Robinson or Tyler Allgeier question, because I think
Don't
we all
it,
know
Matt.
Bijan Robinson is the answer there.
Do we? Do we know?
I think
Do
so.
we know that,
I
Dave?
think.
Hop in a time machine. Go back to last week. See how wrong you are. Arthur.
I know where the Falcons facility is. I'm not that far away.
All right, I'm gonna hit you guys with the final running back start of the week here, and it shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but it's a guy that I also kind of want to talk about as being a little bit of a buy now type player, and it's Javonte Williams going up against the Buffalo Bills this week. And man, you look at the last 2 weeks here, nearly 50 touches over his last 2 games. They are unleashing Javonte Williams over there in Denver. I mean, you look at all of the struggles they had early on in the season, and a lot of that wasn't just stemming from Ross or wide receivers or injuries and this and that. It was stemming from the fact that they could not run the ball successfully. And Javonte Williams really just didn't trust his knee early on in the season. When you're watching those games, you're seeing he's not making the same cuts that he was 2 years ago, a year ago. He's not running through tacklers like he used to. Now all of a sudden we're seeing a little bit more of that. It's not a guy that's as hesitant as he was before. And I found a fun stat from Jacob Gibbs over at CBS Sportsline, and the missed tackles force rate is way up for Javonte Williams over the last few weeks. He went from being at a 13% missed tackles force rate up to 23%. And I mean, I'm not a math whiz here, but that seems like a pretty good jump up for a guy who has been recovering from a knee injury. You're looking at the volume. Now you're looking at a pretty solid matchup. I mean, surprisingly, the Bills, I think we think of them as this great defense, but the injuries have kind of caught up to them. And not having Matt Milano changes everything for that linebacking core there. The Bills are second in missed tackles in the NFL right now. And they've allowed a running back to score at least 13 PPR points in 6 straight games. They're on a really poor trend right now. And that's including back-to-back 17-point games to running backs over the last 2 weeks. So Javonte Williams is not just one of those guys that I think that you can start and is going to get you a solid double-digit outing. He might have a big blow-up game here, where we're talking about 20 points plus from Javonte Williams. So I really like him as a guy that you can probably trade for, start in DFS, wherever you got him. Javonte Williams needs to be in your lineup in week 10.
Yeah, and just makes a great buy low too. Has a really soft schedule for the rest of the year. I think we kind of got maybe a little misled with Breece Hall and his kind of week 1 performance, but this is more of the standard recovery we see from somebody coming off an ACL tear. You tear your ACL early in the season, kind of takes till mid-year the next year till you're up to 100%, and 30 touches last week. I mean, I don't think there's any limitations on Javonte Williams' workload at this point. He's looked good. Schedule softens up. He looks like that ACL is behind him. So love that call out. He could be one of those guys that people have kind of forgotten about that could really, really be a late season hammer for a lot of fantasy teams.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely a nice play there. And I would even add that if you're in leagues where those guys are all you're looking for a back and you're desperate, another desperation play would be his teammate Jaleel McLaughlin.
Yep.
Because the Bills are not the defense they were to begin the season, and they've given up their biggest games to backs with speed. Travis Etienne went wild against the Bills a few weeks ago.
Remember what Miami did to him?
Yeah, and exactly, with Devon Achane. So you look at that, and those 2 backs right there give you an idea of what Jaleel McLaughlin can do, because like those other backs, he knows how to run between the tackles, and he's getting a steady 6 touches per game, which doesn't sound like a lot. But if you're just looking for a shot at double-digit points against a weak defense with a guy who can get a breakaway score, McLaughlin is one of those candidates for you.
Yeah, guys, I think that we've got, what was that? I'm not great at math here. 6 running backs that we think we can start this week. What is it? 5 out of 4
7,
teams?
6.5 if we're saying Jaleel McLaughlin too. We're at 6.5.
Definitely a half. He's not a big guy. So we gave you our running back starts the week here for week 10. Let's move on to our wide receivers. Matt, why don't you kick us off here with your first wide receiver start of the week?
Look, I mean, you look at Will Levis and what he's done in Tennessee, and he's aggressive, and he's going to be, in a situation this week where, Tennessee gets to face off with a weak Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. And to me, they're very weak pass defense. Who do you want more than a quarterback who's aggressive, who leans on his primary receiver? And his primary receiver is basically the closest thing to a veteran wrestling heel who knows every angle in the book to basically lie, cheat, and steal to get his way open. And I say that with admiration.
Yes.
I'm not a high school coach who's trying to teach kids morals. I'm actually just a fantasy football writer hoping to recommend guys that will help you win. And everybody in the NFL has to learn how to play that line, know where the officials are and where they can put their hands where the official can't see it. And he's basically given a tutorial his entire career doing this. And he can win by the rules too, but he can also, if he needs to play dirty, he can. And I think that you're going to see, DeAndre Hopkins, who's basically been a top 15 wide receiver over the past few weeks, deliver once again against a weak Buccaneers lineup. And he'll win deep. He'll win over the middle. He can win short and in the red zone. So the opportunities are going to come. You don't have to worry situationally where his opportunities are going to come. They're going to come at any time.
I think that's my favorite succinct breakdown I've ever heard on DeAndre Hopkins. I think he just absolutely nailed that. That's exactly how he plays. I love it.
Appreciate it.
And I mean, just to even like take this a step further, I know that he hasn't exactly impressed us on every single level yet, but Will Levis does seem to be like a little bit of an upgrade over Ryan Tannehill for this offense. And Matt, like you mentioned, the matchup is really great this week going up against the Bucks. Since week 6, they're allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers. And Will Levis, I mean, he's like Linus in Peanuts with his little like security blanket. That's what DeAndre Hopkins is for him, man. Like that is his security blanket 100%. So I love that call out for this week. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, go
Oh
ahead.
yeah, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, the biggest thing that we're waiting to see with Will Levis is what the Steelers were able to prove is that if they can get pressure on Will Levis and drop deep, then Will Levis isn't as effective. But if you play super aggressive and you blitz and you play man to man, you're going to be in trouble. I think Tampa Bay is probably going to be more along the lines of the Steelers, but they're not going to be as effective. And so as a result of that, Hopkins is still safe play.
And I'll add a link in the YouTube description for all of the readers out there to a link to this week's roundtable where we had some really good discussion on Will Levis kind of as a whole long-term outlook, whether we're buying or holding in Dynasty. Matt always does an awesome job putting that together. So we'll have a link in the YouTube description for anybody that wants to check that out.
Yeah, I don't read. It takes too long. But that feels like more of my problem, my fault for us to why it's like that. Dave, give us your wide receiver start of the week here, your first one.
So again, like I said, the theme of this show is kind of leaning into matchups here. We talked about Javonte Williams. We talked about half of Jaleel McLaughlin. And now I'm going to talk about Courtland Sutton a little bit. Like we said, this isn't the same Buffalo Bills defense that we've seen in years past, getting really banged up by injuries right here. And Sutton, he's been startable, but kind of disappointing. He's the per game wide receiver 31. He hasn't eclipsed 20 PPR points in a single game, but he's posted double-digit points in all but one game. I mean, just the master of consistency, just boring consistency. You know what you're getting from him, and it's not all that exciting, but this is a game where I think you should see him get peppered with targets. If we want to read into Vegas lines a little bit, they're giving Denver 7.5 points, which is the second most of the week, behind only the 16.5 points they're giving the New York Giants against Dallas. So we can kind of read between the lines and tell us that this game might favor the Buffalo Bills, in which case they would have to throw to Courtland Sutton. If you look, the Broncos have been in 3 blowouts so far this year where they've lost by double digits. And in those games, Courtland Sutton's averaging 6.7 targets per game. He scored a touchdown in all of those games as well. So I think Russ is going to have to rely on Sutton, who has kind of become the de facto wide receiver 1 in this offense against a banged up Buffalo secondary and a powerhouse Buffalo offense. So starting him ahead of some pretty spicy names this week in my rankings. I've got him ahead of Jordan Addison, Calvin Ridley, Zay Flowers, George Pickens, Alfredo. Are any of those your starts of the week? I think I did it this week. I think I avoided your starts of the week.
I don't want to give anything away, okay? I want to keep teasing the viewer here. Dave, but we're getting to a weird point here. Does this mean that we really like the Broncos for fantasy this week? I mean, transitive property, does that mean that we like Russ Wilson this week too?
I mean, I'm not putting $1 on the Broncos money line, if that's what you're asking me. But if I think there could be some fantasy goodness in this Broncos offense, absolutely. Yeah, again, we don't want to try to predict game script. That's a really slippery slope, but we can kind of let Vegas do the work for us. And Vegas says that this is going to be a 2-score game, most likely, in which case Denver is going to be playing from behind. That means checkdowns to Javonte Williams. It means checkdowns to Jaleel McLaughlin. It means a possible garbage time for Russ or for Courtland Sutton. So yeah, I think if you're looking for an offense that could provide a lot of fantasy value, Denver could do it, but I don't expect them to win this game.
I'm so glad that, that you actually did go into game script and start talking about some things that could actually happen, because if we're just going to lean on Vegas, what's the point? I know. I mean, it has value. It's a great layer of information, but I enjoy the fact that we can get into a little game script here and there.
Yeah, and it's dangerous. I mean, any given Sunday, we know anything can happen. But again, if that's kind of the coin flip decider for you, I think it's okay to maybe try to look at what the game script could potentially be. I don't think that there's any chance that Denver, I mean, I shouldn't say any chance, but I don't expect Denver to be up where they have an ability to kind of control the clock late and run the ball, they're probably going to be looking to throw the ball as this game progresses.
So I have a question here. I mean, I kind of starting to see what Courtland Sutton is here. Is Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, is this kind of like if you're going out with your buddies and you make sure that you're only going out with your ugly friends so that like you look better? Is that what's going on here with Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy? Because you said he's like, what, wide receiver 31? It's not great, but you're like, I'll start him because he's the best wide receiver there in Denver. Is that kind of where we're at?
And like I said, it's just been like consistent mediocrity. Like he's giving you double-digit points every single week, but he hasn't showcased any sort of ceiling yet to eclipse 20. But I think Courtland Sutton's a really good player. He's another guy that, we kind of knew he was a really good player, and then he tore his ACL, and I think his recovery from that ACL took a lot longer than we expected. We were hoping for the breakout last year, and it didn't really happen. He still had that knee brace on through training camp. He looked kind of slow and sluggish to start the year, but now he's over 2 years removed from the ACL tear. I don't know if he's ever going to have that juice that he did pre-injury, but he is looking like he could be a pretty legitimate wide receiver one for his team. Not a fantasy wide receiver one, but I think he's good enough to be the number one wide receiver on his team, and we're seeing that this year. Again, I think some of the problems, the reason we haven't really seen the full ceiling is just Denver as a whole, but I think Courtland Sutton's still a very talented wide receiver.
I'm going to keep this next part very short, very sweet. If you have a Seattle Seahawks wide receiver, just go ahead and start them. At first, I was like, let me put Jaxon Smith-Njigba here, and then it's okay, he's kind of got an injury thing. Then I was like, okay, Tyler Lockett, he's also got an injury thing. And DK Metcalf, well, he hasn't been very good, but it doesn't matter. At this point, go ahead and start any Seattle Seahawks wide receiver you have this week going up against the Washington Commanders. Commanders giving up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And we've seen 11 wide receivers score at least 11 PPR points. So you kind of know that you got a decent floor here with any one of these guys. You've seen the role start to grow for Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And I mean, we saw some major blow up games here from AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, DJ Moore. So you could be seeing a big blow up game from Tyler Lockett, from DK Metcalf in particular here, who's been disappointing throughout the early stages of the season. So I think when you're looking at these Seahawks receivers, you can have some confidence that there's a decent floor, but also you could have a complete blow up where they're winning you your entire week.
Is Jake Bobo that ugly friend who actually tells great jokes and has such a sterling personality that he's going to completely just rob you of what you were looking for at the bar?
No,
Yeah,
Jake Bobo is totally
wingman.
the really attractive friend, but doesn't understand how pretty they are. It's
okay.
The one that hasn't
There
taken
you
off
go.
the glasses yet, and they just don't have the confidence yet. But Jake Bobo,
Yeah, the guy that shoots himself in the foot anytime he tries talking to a woman, just has absolutely no game and could if he just put in the work. No, Jake Bobo's been fun, man. He's a lot better than I think people expected him to be. That's one of those where we get like so buried during the combine season and workout season. Everyone says, oh, this guy's slow. And then you watch him on film and you're like, wait, he's actually pretty fast. Much like Rashid Shaheed, one of your favorite guys, Matt. We've talked about him a lot this season. Put up terrible testing numbers, and then you watch him on the field and you're like, wait, he's one of the fastest guys out there. What did these numbers tell us during his pro day?
I think he wins. I think he basically earns opportunities with his self-deprecating humor.
Yep. I like it.
That's so great. I love this. I love that we're just turning all these football players into like guys that you're going to the bar with. All right, that's what we're doing. All right, let's head on to our second wide receiver starts of the week that we each have here. Matt, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, listen, Jahan Dotson, wide receiver 7 over the past 3 weeks. And you look at, Curtis Samuel and the toe injury or whatever injury he tends to have at some point during a year, usually tends to crop up. And you look at the fact that he can play inside and outside. They've been able to be, a little bit more aggressive with him. He gives you some ability after the catch, also tight over the middle. So I just like the opportunities that he's going to wind up having. Again, he's also facing, just like everybody else on this list that we have, is facing a fairly weak defense. So, at the same time, Seattle isn't as weak as it's been. Now, in the past 3 to 5 weeks, instead of being in the top 15 of generosity to wide receivers and fantasy points, they're actually among the 3 most stingy teams for that. I don't think it matters. I think the fact that Dotson's ability to work, and as versatilely as he can, means that he's going to get more lead probably in opportunities here. I think McLaurin is going to get the Tyreek Woolen treatment. And while McLaurin is good enough to have his day and have a decent day against Woolen, It just means that the weakest link is going to wind up with Dotson, and that's good for you.
Yeah, Jahan Dotson is a guy that we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Dave. That I think
last week, Cecil Lammey, that was his start of the week.
Yeah, and I still think it's true, man. Like, we forget that just because a player is good in their rookie year doesn't mean that they're going to hit the ground running week one here. Especially, you've got a new offense, a new quarterback. Everything was sort of getting pieced together, right? And so we're seeing that now. Or Jahan Dotson is becoming a serious weapon here for Sam Howell and the Commanders. And it's crazy to think of how many people dropped him in their leagues, and now everyone's like, oh my gosh, I got to start him. I got to get him into my lineup. Everything is just totally flipped the script here. All right, Dave, take us to your next wide receiver start of the week. And this one makes me happy. I really, really like this one. This is probably my favorite start of the week that you've had all year.
Yeah, I think a lot of people really like this guy, and I'm going deep here, and I do this every single week where I try to pick like one really, really deep play for all you that are out here in your 14, 16, 18 team leagues, your dynasty leagues where you're just completely slammed with buys this week. I'm going to go with Khalil Shakir, a guy that you could probably pick up in your standard 10 or 12 team league, and I don't recommend him starting him there, but in some of your deeper leagues, Khalil Shakir is definitely worth a look. He's got 10 targets over the last 2 weeks, which isn't anything crazy, but he has set season highs in snap counts in back-to-back weeks. Now, I talked about this as soon as Dawson Knox got injured. Khalil Shakir is a really good route runner and really good at catching the ball and doing all those fun things after the catch, but he is quietly one of the best blocking wide receivers in the league. And blocking leads to snaps, snaps lead to routes, routes lead to targets, and that's what we're seeing right now is that Khalil Shakir is slowly becoming a full-time player, played 71% of the snaps last week on one of the league's best offenses. Now, Now, he's going up against a Broncos defense that's given up more yards per pass attempt than any other team. And Khalil Shakir, he can win short, he can win deep. We saw the big play upside a couple of weeks ago. Like I said, this is a deep, deep, deep play here. Obviously, you're not starting him in your shallow leagues, but at worst, pick him up and stash him because he's a very talented player who could come on as a bigger weapon as the season progresses. So, again, some of the deep guys that I'm starting him ahead of, Jaden Reed going up against Pittsburgh. Right now, I've got him ahead of Tyler Boyd. Keep an eye on Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, who are both on the injury report. Starting him ahead of Brandon Cooks, who has found the end zone, but hasn't really had a lot of usage. And starting him ahead of my guy last week, Quentin Johnston, as well. So Khalil Shakir, hardly cracks my top 50, but in your deep leagues out there, I'm okay starting him this week. Really talented player who is seeing his role grow since the Dawson Knox injury.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Khalil Shakir. He's someone I recommended a couple weeks ago to start monitoring and adding in leagues like that in my football guys column, the top 10, where I've been able to show clips of Shakir. And he's someone that's been a favorite of mine for a while for a lot of the reasons that Dave mentioned. It's been a funny narrative with him because Bill's beat writers talk about all the drops that he has in practices. But in actual live action, even last year, he's made pivotal plays. He's made some trust catches on targets that you don't really throw unless you feel good about that receiver. There's a play against the Pittsburgh Steelers last year where he makes a back shoulder catch up the seam between two defenders that Josh Allen doesn't throw if he doesn't believe in this guy. So Shakir, what's been fascinating, though, is that I think an alternative explanation as to why Shakir's been doing well, in addition to the fact that, yeah, you're right, Dave, he's a good blocker, is also that Josh Allen finally got the memo from his offensive coordinators. They need to spread the ball around and need to stop just leaning on two players, which was Dawson Knox and Stephon Diggs. And if you spread the ball around the offense, you might actually find easier openings and you're getting more people involved and our offense becomes unpredictable. And you don't have to be Josh Allen from Wyoming getting hammered at Nebraska the way that you were, back in college where you're running around with your head cut off and doing stupid things. Because a little bit, Josh Allen's kind of the Ricky Bobby of fantasy football when you look at it. Unbelievable ability, but it's not always there conceptually for him. He leans very hard on his physicality. The fact that they're finally getting the memo to go, Shakir's getting open on hot routes. He's getting open on adjustments. You need to feed him that ball rather than go, I'm going to break the pocket and try and run through 5 tackles and then make a throw across the body that that it gets intercepted or tipped or falls incomplete, get us an extra 5 yards. That might help you down the line. So yeah, I love the Shakir idea there for, adding him this week.
And I think you and Jeff Bell did an awesome job last week on the halftime show during halftime of that Bills game, kind of breaking down the development that we've seen from Josh Allen and how the tools are there. We know that there's no secret whatsoever, but that we still are waiting on him to really take the step forward as kind of an intellectual player. I think that you and Jeff did a great job talking about that. That was one of my favorite shows that you guys have done all weekend. Love that Thursday show you do, but especially getting to hear Jeff, at halftime during a Bills game, getting to talk about Josh Allen and the Bills made for a really entertaining listen.
Anything he can do to avoid tents is a good idea, whether they're blue tents or white tents. I'll just put it that way.
So when I was watching that Bills game and going back through the film, everything that you guys are saying is so true about not only Josh Allen, but Khalil Shakir as well. And what the Bills have done is really open things up that he's not trying to force feed the ball to any one person. Maybe still Stephon Diggs, right? But Dalton Kincaid has kind of become that de facto number 2 over there. And Gabe Davis has almost turned into just a decoy, a guy that is clearing out for easy routes for Khalil Shakir. So, Dave, I know you say that you got him like around the 50s and he's maybe for those deeper leagues, but I don't know, man. Soon enough, he might not be just for deeper leagues. He could be doing what Cole Beasley was doing for years and just being that really good slot receiver for Josh Allen. I mean, this offense, if they can click, it can be really good for multiple players there, not just 1 or 2.
And that's why I said at worst, like even if you're set at wide receiver, pick him up and stash him because we're seeing the role grow. We know he's a talented player and he could be a guy that can really help you out later in the year.
All right, I'm going to give you my last wide receiver start of the week here, and it's another guy who's been a little bit under the radar. I think last week or maybe a couple weeks ago was when people started to add him off their waiver wire. And now I don't think he's just a guy that you stash on your bench. I think he's a guy that you can start nearly every single week. I'm talking about Demario Douglas, wide receiver for the New England Patriots, going up against the Indianapolis Colts this week. And I did a whole breakdown of him and his game last week over on my Twitter against the Washington Commanders. And I really see him as a Zay Flowers light. I don't know he's necessarily as dynamic as Zay. Very few athletes in the NFL are. And he's definitely, I mean, he is diminutive, if we want to use a big word here to describe him. He is a little dude, and it shows up like that. But it's funny, you put him versus one of the other smaller receivers on the Patriots, and you had him lined up next to Jalen Reagor so much last week. Oh my gosh, Jalen Reagor, man. Wow. He's not good at football anymore. I don't know what's going on. It's just low effort on everything. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to break away and start saying bad things about someone, but Demario Douglas, it just, what it did was it gave you that contrast of seeing how much better Demario Douglas is than a bunch of the other New England Patriots wide receivers. And I think what the Patriots were trying to do last week was spread the ball around as much as they could. We did see some targets going to Juju Smith-Schuster, a couple here to Mike Gesicki, and the ball was moving around and getting to the running backs. But what they were doing was they were kind of forcing the ball to Demario Douglas on some early targets, some quick slants. They're giving him jet sweeps, some crossers to get him on the run, on the move, in space where he can make things happen. And then towards the end of that game, when the Patriots were trying to make a comeback, Mac Jones was looking his way throughout the entire 2-minute drill. So you're looking at a guy that's had 6+ targets in 3 straight games, over 80% snap rate last week. He's kind of the Patriots wide receiver 1 at this point, which I think for fantasy makes him a solid wide receiver 3 each week. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, no pushback there. Pop Douglas, he's a fun guy to watch, and his opportunity is there. But I'll let Matt take this one. I'm sure he's got much more insightful things to say than I.
I don't know. I was just gonna say, if I could, first of all, I mean, I like the Zay Flowers light comparison. That might be, I'm approaching from an opposite end of the spectrum, but I'd say it's kind of. I always liked Olamide Zaccheaus as a player. I didn't think he'd get a lot of opportunities in Atlanta. He's certainly not getting them in Philadelphia. And you understand why. He's a late round guy with that draft capital label, but he's always performed pretty well, who can get deep on you, but he can also win over the middle and run after the catch. And I think that describes Demario Douglas's game very well. He's a guy I also recommended, a couple weeks ago in the top 10 as someone to start looking at, because really, when you look at the New England Patriots, let's remember something, and we can look back at their track record since Bill Belichick came into New England. And they cannot draft a wide receiver to save their life that isn't a slot receiver. Slot receivers, they're very good at picking up. They're good at taking quarterbacks like Julian Edelman and make him a slot receiver, or running backs like I'm trying to remember the Danny Woodhead out of Chadron State, and making him, he had top 10 performances and top 15 performances both as a receiver and a running back in fantasy during 9 seasons. He had 4 seasons that were strong. And then you can look at, other players that they had, Deion Branch, or Troy Brown. They're all really more slot guys, and they were guys that they picked up. So Douglas is a great pick there. The problem is Juju Smith-Schuster was really naturally a slot. They picked him up. Where are they going to put all these slot guys? Because somebody's got to play outside. And it might end up being, the only other guy I can imagine that would work out other than Hunter Henry, and you've mentioned him in the past, is Kayshon Boutte, and he's really naturally a slot flanker mix, and they still believe in him, but they're not playing him right now. So until further notice, Douglas is the best play, that you possibly have, because he can win over the middle, win tough. He's not going to win deep, most likely, and there's a broken coverage, but he's going to get volume, and volume's going to help you out in PPR leagues.
I know we saved the tight end discussion for the audio version, but dare we say Hunter Henry is kind of another guy that could step up now without any real semblance of a wide receiver one. I think Demario Douglas is the guy you're starting a wide receiver, but I think this also bumps Hunter Henry into that top 12 weekly discussion now that he's going to see his role grow a little bit as well.
Dave, you mentioned something there where you bring up the term wide receiver one. And I think we do this a lot in fantasy, where we often say, this guy is going to be the wide receiver one for this team. The wide receiver one for various teams and various quarterbacks and various schemes is going to have different values. The wide receiver one for, let's just, since I'm doing this, the Miami Dolphins, right, is going to be a little bit different than the wide receiver one for the New England Patriots. And so even though we say that a guy like Pop Douglas can be the wide receiver one for the Patriots, that hasn't really amounted to a whole lot. I do think that the way they're utilizing him is what kind of changes that up a bit, and he'll be in that wide receiver 3 discussion each week. And if that role starts to expand and he starts to become a guy that they're targeting down in the red zone and using in a bunch of other fun formations and in the backfield and stuff like that, I think that the sky's the limit there. I think we're looking at a guy that all of a sudden becomes a bit more valuable.
And on some teams, a team's wide receiver 3 is more valuable than a team's wide receiver 1. Look back like 2 years ago when Tyler Boyd was putting up more fantasy points per game than the Patriots wide receiver 1, whoever that was. So, yeah, we throw these monikers around all the time: wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. But at the end of the day, we got to look at each specific system and know that these are really, really tough to compare.
Well, Dave, like you alluded to, we save the tight ends and quarterback starts of the week for the audio version, because those are premium positions where you got just one person to start. Well, we're going to give you plenty of options over on the other side of that. To go to the audio version of this show, all you have to do is click the link down in the description below. You'll head on over to whatever your favorite podcast platform is, Apple, Spotify, whatever it is. While you're there, make sure you subscribe to the show and leave a review. That is so helpful for us. If you've enjoyed this show, I want to thank you for watching. Come hang out with us over on the other side of this in the audio. We'll catch you on the other side.